If you've been following our page in order, you've learned a lot about SAS, how it promotes social emotional learning, and the SAS Bionic Powers activity. Now that you've learned all those things, let's now jump into how you can use an approach like the Bionic Powers to help your child explore their own goals. Let's dive in with some tips that you can use to explore goal setting with your child. Remember, you are the expert of your child, yourself, and your family. So use these tips that we have and strategies in a way that works best for you. All right, let's get started. So the first tip we have for you to get the conversation started, whether you're doing an activity with your child or you're just having a conversation about what's important to them, that you're, express to them that you're really curious to learn more about some of the things that they're interested in lately, is to ask open-ended questions. Some examples of open-ended questions to get you started are things like, what are things you enjoy doing? And can you think of a time when you felt really good about something you did? Tell me more about that. You could also ask really more direct questions that are still open-ended, like what do you wish you could be better at? Or if you could spend a whole day doing anything you wanted, what would you do? And the last type of example we can give you as an open-ended question is to think about something that they've done recently or something that they've learned recently. So you could say, what is something you learned recently that you found interesting? And you could use that as the starting point for your conversation. Our next tip is to make it fun to help your child be engaged. Remember, like I said, you know your child best. So start thinking about what they find fun or interesting. And this can be a way that you can excite them in exploring these topics more with them. So again, using open-ended questions, but you can make it even more fun by using some sort of theme that's related to something they're interested in. Like in SAS, we use a spy theme to capture kids' imaginations. Some ideas you might like to use with your child is you could say, imagine you have superpowers. What would they be? You could even say, let's draw those. And that would be very similar to the SAS Bionic Powers, where they pick stickers to match those things. So you could be doing something active with them. Another idea to make it fun is you could ask, if you had a magic wand, what would you do differently or change? You can go even further and say, what would you do differently or change about, school? Or what would you do differently or change about, when we go to the shopping center? And these are some magic wand questions that I really love asking, because it really does help kids think about things that are really important to them. And the answers that they can give you when you ask that question can be really interesting and give you a giggle sometimes. You can also say, pretend you're building a robot version of yourself. What upgrade would you give to make yourself even better? And the last idea I'll give you about making it fun related to open-ended questions is you could say, if you were a wizard and could cast a spell to get better at something, what would it be? So those are some different ways that you can use those open-ended questions and then turn them to be a little bit more fun by using a special interest or something that your child would think is fun to explore or dive into their imagination with. All right, and the last tip on starting this conversation with goal setting would be to actually let your child take the lead. I know with my kids, this can be kind of tricky sometimes, especially if I'm in a hurry or, I haven't really considered some of the things that, that I'm bringing to the conversation that's important to me. Like, let's say we have a meeting with the school coming up and I really want to get a better idea from my youngest about what are some of the things that she would want to identify as goals when we go talk to the teacher. So I might be coming to that conversation with some things that are important to me, but I need to remember, and this is a tip for you as well, is that we need to let our child take the lead in the conversation. So this would mean a couple things. We would like to try and, like I said, just, notice if you're bringing anything that's important to you to the conversation and identify that and kind of put that aside for a second. And then you can also consider that, a conversation might not be your child's preferred way to explore these ideas. And they also might like to communicate in a different way. So, they might prefer to communicate whilst, listening to music in their headphones, or they might like to be engaging in an activity like I had said a moment ago, so that the conversation is more natural. Or if you're doing it more like an activity, that you're doing that in a more natural way too. You also want to be open to letting your child respond in the ways that helps them feel safe and comfortable, and also approach the task in their own way. So if you're asking the questions and they're answering it, but you're not really getting to the point that you're trying to learn about, or that you're interested in hearing more about, they might be giving you really short answers, and you could just roll with it and be like, oh, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that. We'll give you some tips in a moment just about how to handle things, like if your child gets stuck and you're having some trouble with that. But tip 3 is, as I said, let your child take the lead. And this will help you to avoid steering your child into talking about things that they think you think are important for them, as opposed to you learning more about what's important about them, for them, and that they're sharing with you. And then also being able to be, roll with how they prefer to communicate, and let them see where they take the conversation to once you get the ball rolling and get it started. Next, I'm going to pass you off to my colleague Lisa, and she's going to talk about the importance of neurodivergent affirming approaches in goal setting.
Experts widely acknowledge, and I'm sure we parents can agree, that parents' and children's views on goals and goal priorities often differ. As parents, we have an opportunity to model for our children how we embrace understanding our differences and preferences while respecting and valuing them. So remember, this isn't about your goals for your child. It's about what they value. Encourage them to explore without pressure. Supporting your child's autonomy and choosing their goals helps build motivation and confidence, leading to greater success in applying new skills. Next, we'll share some tips with you that you can try to help your child if they get stuck with thinking of and identifying some goals for themselves.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Okay, so if your child is having difficulty identifying their goals or strengths, we have some strategies you can try. Okay, so what if your child is stuck? One of the strategies you can use is to use everyday examples. Instead of asking something formal like, what's important to you? You can reframe the question to something more like, what's something you enjoy doing? Or, what do you wish you could get better at? The next thing to do is to look for clues in their interests. If your child loves building things, problem solving might be what we would look at in SAS as a bionic power that they'd like to strengthen. Problem solving could be a strength of theirs that they're really good at when they're building certain things, but it's so important to them that they want to be able to do even bigger buildings and bigger elaborate structures. So learning some additional skills to help be able to problem solve more complex buildings could be a goal that they want to work on. And then learning the skills on problem solving, like the decoder problem solving formula that we teach in the small group program for SAS, is an example of a skill they could learn to help achieve their goal of being an even better problem solver. And that is really important to them because it'll help them to build even better structures. You can also look for clues on if they enjoy playing with younger kids. That might be showing you that helping others could be a strength of theirs. If they love stories and art, maybe creativity is an important value to them as well. If these clues and their interests are also a helpful thing to consider, you can tie that into everyday examples in how you ask your questions as well. So you could talk about, what do you wish you could get better at when you're building your structures? Or, questions that are related to some of the interests that they have as well. And finally, starting with small goals can be a very effective strategy. If long-term goals are feeling too overwhelming, trying short-term ones is better. Ask your child, what's something you'd like to try next week? Or what's one way you could make your day better tomorrow? That can be really helpful. The next challenge you might run into is if your child doesn't even want to talk about goals. And that's okay too, but here are some other strategies you can try. Remember, we want to make it fun. So it doesn't, you don't want to make it feel like, they're in the hot seat, as we say sometimes. So, helping your child be interested, if they're having a hard time thinking about or talking about what's important to them, making it fun and turning it into a game can be a great way to engage them. So instead of, we talked about saying, if you were a superhero, what superpowers would you have? You could turn that into an actual game, and you could have everyone do it, including yourselves, being like, all right, let's pretend we all have superpowers. I'm going to think about which powers I would like to have. You can think about the ones you'd like to have. And let's play a game and guess what each other's superpowers are. And you can act them out. You can draw them. Lots of different ways you can turn that into a game. We can also use storytelling and share about a time that we had a goal that we set and that we worked really hard towards, and that tell them the story about that. Another thing you can do to use storytelling is to ask your child about, to think about a character in a book or a movie or a game that where they had to figure out something that was really important to them, and they worked towards achieving that as well. Another strategy you might consider if your child doesn't want to talk about goals is, we might need to actually give them space. And this can be a little bit tricky sometimes, especially if we're really interested and engaged ourselves, but our child isn't really wanting to talk about it. Some children need time to think before answering. And so giving them the space and time to explore the idea and come back to it later is a really helpful approach. If they're not ready to talk about it now, that's okay. You can even leave out things for them to, think about what you were talking about and in their own time, and then you guys can come back to it again later. So for example, if we've given you some ideas on ways that you could create a worksheet or a drawing page for your child, you can create that worksheet, put your question on the top. You could draw an outline of a body, or I'm sure you can find an outline online somewhere you could print out where you could, your child could actually draw on some of the superpowers or things that they might want to be able to do even better, and leave it out for them. And if you're feeling really ambitious, you could even have multiple copies out, and everyone in the family could do it. And you could also share and talk about it when you're all together next, as a family. So those are some ideas you can use for that. And the last challenge that we'll talk about with some strategies you can consider is if you're steering your child too much. It's really natural for us to want the best for our kids, but this activity, remember, it's about their values and their goals. So to help us stay on track to ensure that we're helping our child take the lead is to ask and not tell. Instead of saying, you should pick being brave as your bionic power or as your goal, because remember, we talked about you needing to speak up more, and that was something that you said that was important to you. Instead, try and switch it to a question. So instead of telling, you want to ask. Say, do you think being brave is something that's important to you? Next thing to do is to pause and listen. I know this can be a challenging thing for me, and it probably is for some of you as well. So if your child actually hesitates before answering, resist that urge to fill in the blank for them and give them the time to think and process. And lastly, let them change their minds if they want to. If they pick a goal, but later they want to change it, that's absolutely okay. So rather than us steering them or too much and trying to keep them committed to a specific goal, remember that changing our minds and exploring our goals and what's important to us will change over time, and growth is a process. I hope these strategies are helpful for you with troubleshooting any challenges you might encounter, and that you can have fun exploring. To help recap all the troubleshooting strategies we just walked through, I've put them on the screen here for you. So if your child is stuck, remember, use everyday examples, look for clues in their interests, and start with small goals. If your child seems uninterested or doesn't want to talk about goals, remember, make it fun. You can turn it into a game. Use storytelling and give them space if they need it. And if you're thinking you're steering your child too much, to help them lead, remember to ask, don't tell, pause and listen, and let them change their mind.
Here are some final thoughts to share with you. Instead of focusing on what your child should achieve, focus on helping them discover what excites them, what motivates them. Use our tips to try this approach with your own child and watch them discover their own strengths through setting goals and working towards reaching them. Use our tips for guiding these conversations with confidence, and refer back to the SAS Bionic Powers examples from our Junior Detectives skills snapshots as well. Helping your child explore their goals can build their motivation and confidence for learning new skills. If you'd like to see how the Secret Agent Society small group program can empower your child to reach their goals, find an SAS provider near